All right, my name is Jason, and my group mates are Ramon, Jarrett, and Colin, and we're Team 3. And our project is the water irrigation and crop selection for South Texas. A little recap: we have 100 acres of land that we're given. This rangeland is going to be turned into farmland. We have to select the best cash crop or crops to grow on it, select the best irrigation method along with the source of that irrigation water, and determine our source of energy. So we've had a lot of recent meetings because if you remember, our last solution we proposed, we deemed unfeasible, so we've had to start over. And we met with Dr. Kingman, and he had some information to give us, along with turning us over and getting us in contact with Dr. Dana Porter, who we met with. And I also was able to get in contact with Grayson Wilmeth, who is a farmer that farms as close as they farm to that region. I mean, there's not farming anywhere really around it, but he's as close as they farm to it. He's down in that area. So this is just from our meeting with Dr. Kingman, where we met and we discussed a lot of the irrigation issues, especially around the well. Now this is from our meeting with Dr. Porter. And she had a ton of useful information to give us. She was an advisor, I think, on the engineering team who had this project a year or two ago. And she's a farm irrigation specialist and a little bit of a specialist when it comes to crops too. She kind of hinted at, but she kind of pushed us towards the fact that the well we would be drilling for our irrigation, first of all, is too small to be an irrigation well. It's a household size well. It's not even big enough to be irrigation, which makes it not worth it in the end to drill that well for irrigation. You're not going to come back out on it. It's just not going to happen. It's too small. You're not getting enough water out of the ground fast enough to irrigate to return on that investment. And she also told us that the amount of polluted solids in our water that we're dealing with is also way above what people would normally try to irrigate with. Usually they try to stay around the 2,500 part per million threshold, and that's kind of the top limit, where we're dealing with like around 3,500 or more. So she kind of turned us away from drilling a well and into looking at it from a different perspective of trying to irrigate with the water that we have. When I spoke to Grayson, Mr. Grayson, he pointed us, he had a lot to say about the crops they grow. And when I was presenting the project to him, he told us there was really two crops that could get you that high of a return on your investment that quickly, that they already grow in that area, and that was peanuts and watermelon. And peanuts wouldn't work in the area we're trying to do due to the salt content, and the soil itself wouldn't be great for it. Plus, we've had nowhere near enough water to give them. They require quite a bit.
Good morning, I am Ramon Pimentel. Next, we touch on new project solution. Now, as Jason stated, we decided to scrap the well. So now we don't have the well, and we don't have the $100,000 that comes as an expense with it. We decided to irrigate from the tank. Now, since the tank doesn't hold that much water, we decided to go with 10 acres of irrigated watermelon. And we decided to choose watermelon since this is the crop which will yield the highest return, or we believe. With the other 90 acres out of the 100 that we have, we decided to plant dryland wheat, which in some years will present some returns, but in others it won't.
And going into the economic analysis to give an economic aspect of this new solution that we have, you can tell from our initial investment cost compared to our last initial investment cost, this is much lower, mainly due to the fact that we no longer have to drill a water well. We no longer have to take the salt out of that water, so we don't need RO systems like we had before. We also won't have that shed for the RO system that we had before. So that takes out well over $100,000 out of that initial investment cost. Allows us to be more efficient with our investment funds. We will have a water pump like we had last time, pump out of the stock tank. but it will be a smaller water pump because we only have to irrigate 10 acres. We don't have to pump that water out for 10 acres rather than the full 800. That's why that's lower. That cost is lower for the water pump, about $1,000 lower, and our generator cost is over $10,000 lower because we don't have to supply power to that well pump as well. For the watermelon itself, this is looking at the financials that are specific to the watermelon crop. This is on 10 acres, and so everything from our herbicide and pesticide, that chemical cost to the tilling, the planting will be a custom hire, so that's why it's a little bit higher. Our harvest will be a labor cost, so that's people going out and actually picking the watermelons and hauling them off. And then you can tell that our value of that watermelon on 10 acres will yield us a $3,000 profit on that 10 acres each year that we have that. Moving on to the wheat that we will be using on the 90 acres that is aside from that watermelon. We still have the chemical application, tilling is a custom hire, planting is a custom hire. We still have the fertilizer cost, which will be our biggest cost there. And then the harvest will also be custom hire. The seed value, the harvest that we get from that will be $14,000. That is a very conservative estimate because we understand that since we will not be irrigating that wheat crop, that the yield will be much lower than it would be if we were irrigating it. And so depending on the rainfall will change what yield we get. So this is a conservative estimate. It could be higher than this, but it shouldn't be much lower than this on a bad year. And that will yield us a $1,000 profit on that 90 acres. So then on a 5-year term, like our client desires, we would be turning a profit rather than last time. Now, for the $10,000 initial investment, we'll quickly return that investment and we'll be profiting a little over $9,000 on a 5-year term. You can tell year one here, we won't have a wheat profit because that first year that wheat will not be ready to harvest.
Now we move on to potential risks. Drip line damage. The first potential risk we're looking at is drip line damage, as we see on figure 4. Now, drip line damage can come from multiple sources, but the main source we're looking at is animals. Animals can come in looking for water and bite through the drip lines that are near the watermelons or that are irrigating the watermelons, damage them, create holes, and decrease the pressure that are on the drip lines. Crop damage. Crop damage, again, would come from the animals in the area. Our wheat and our watermelon could get damaged because these animals were foraging for crops for food. Crop growth. Now, since we are planting wheat in a dry-based method, this wheat might not always grow to its full yield, might not provide the full yield that it can, and there might be some issues as well with the watermelon and its growth. Now we'll look at the weather. The weather is one of the most important factors when looking at the potential risks, since we are relying on the average of about 18 inches a year for the weather to let our crops grow appropriately. Next, we'll look at labor. Now, labor can be explained through the custom hire as well as the clearing of land. This has to be efficient, which we can't control. The last potential risk would be crop prices, which is also one of the most important potential risks. And we say this because crop prices do fluctuate from year to year, and so we would have to keep an eye on this.
Good morning, all. I'm Colin. Coming to looking at the Gantt chart for the timeline of when we start the project if the client does initially go through with it. Start of basis of 2022, we will look at starting the land clearing as of around middle of March to start the preparation of the growth of watermelon in mid-spring and early April to mid-April. timelines they show in here, roughly roundabouts, a lot of things can be done within a day besides the growing period, of course, and then the land clearing doing about 15, 20 acres a day on land takes initially a 5 to 7 day period, 7 days being a long term, and do working weekends because that's how farmers do operate. The irrigation is going to take a little bit more depth, causing running the lines, digging trenches, initially installing the drip tape into the system, and plowing the field, doing all the 100 acres in a single day is capable. The longest period of showing is the growing periods alone, starting watermelon, since it does take about 80 days, and you would harvest in roughly the end of June to early July, and after that you would have about the summertime of gap, and then you would start the process of planting your wheat, and then let that grow for 150 days, and dormanting over the winter, finishing out the yield, and then you would harvest it all within the day aspect, and then you initially start right back over again with time frame of plowing it again and going back to watermelon and just constant yearly cycle. Coming to that, looking at to coming next, basically we're going to start assembling our poster we have to present to our client on the with everything that we have initially drawn up and revamping some of our initial stuff that we had to start a new thought process on for, since our first proposal wasn't prosperous. We were going to follow it with Dr. Porter to see what she addresses, maybe give us a little bit more thought on either expanding the watermelon or potentially is there a way to irrigate possibly on the wheat to control the higher yield. And then we need to meet with Mr. Yang to get the final presentation squared away and make sure it's all working correctly. Any comments, questions, or concerns?
Okay, let's have, why don't we have Mr. Rainey, hey, well, why don't we let your team.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry, I'm being indecisive.
Yeah. So if you started with a full pond of water, if the stock tank was full, is 10 acres the maximum amount of watermelon you can have, or how'd you come up with 10 acres?
With relying on the average rainfall yearly, getting rainfall between January to July, you're looking at a total of about 10 inches of rainfall, and we would irrigate 5 inches total, because watermelon takes about 15 to 20 inches of water to grow. And we would use about 2 million gallons in that tank, because relatively, like you said, there's about 4 million gallons available. And then the rest would be rainfall accumulation. So 10 acres is roughly the amount you would be looking at. You could go higher, you can go higher, you're just gonna deplete your water quicker, and that's trying to long-term that use.
All right, so 10 acres wasn't just a random number. That's what the water supply will support. That's good. Also on those things, on your tables there, you had your tilling and planting costs, and you had fertilizer, and then you had chemical.
On the
Yeah,
weed,
so you have fertilizer for $6,000. What is chemical?
Herbicide. That's going to include your herbicides and pesticides, along with some fungicides for the wheat.
Okay. Okay. Wasn't sure what that was. And yeah, we put our watermelons in the ground about the 18th of March. So you're pretty close on your timing. We were a little earlier than that, a couple of weeks. You guys took a hard left turn, and I think you're better for it. You've done really well here. You got a nice presentation. Scrapped the water well, figured it out. Looks good.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, team 4, your questions and comments.
I like the Gantt chart. from what I remember in 301, I guess because there's a lot of items, it's kind of hard to put it into a chart and see like how it would flow. But yeah, that was like my only comment.
I think there was a lot of improvement in the financial charts. I feel like last time it was like we were kind of like squinting at it, trying to figure out where certain numbers came from, and I feel like it was a lot easier to understand and like get the math this time.
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca as well. On the charts for like the wheat and the watermelon, the only thing I would say is maybe a total of the expenses. Instead of like right now as it is, you kind of have to add it up in our head, then subtract the expenses from the revenue. It's not as easy to tell what your total expenses is as it is right now.
Back up to that slide. Yep, okay. All right, Mackenzie, you got anything?
No, just pretty much what they said. I feel like the financial charts.
Mackenzie's lost in space. Sorry, Mackenzie, you're cutting out. You're in slow motion, and that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't I go ahead and take over? All right, you guys have a seat. Okay, Mackenzie, if you can hear me, we can't hear you, so we're just going to press on. But those are good comments, everybody. Wow, this really was a good presentation. Yeah, you really salvaged this project by going back to the drawing board. I've got to give you bonus points for that. I mean, there's really not anywhere in my rubric for that, but I'm going to somehow. Okay, I feel like that you guys you used your resources by talking to Dr. Porter. You know, she is on the one hand, I could probably say, well, you know, you guys just went to a PhD irrigation specialist and asked her what the answer is. But and so why should I give you credit for that? But on the other hand, that's what extension specialists are there for. It's for expertise in specialized areas of agriculture, and you guys leverage that resource. So I'm going to give you credit for that. Yeah, this is a challenging situation. You guys came up with a very simple, cost-effective solution that is more grounded in reality than your previous one. So that's awesome. A couple of questions here. Ramon, how are you dealing with the water quality? I mean, you're still going to have some high saline oil in that, or not oil, water in that pond, right? Or who's got that, Colin?
No, the water is 311 parts per million inside that tank. So that's all flush of rainwater, so you're not pulling anything from that.
Great answer.
I want to start in place, so that's basically a tank barrier.
Okay. So your answer is, hey, we're not pumping up that high saline water. We're leaving that in the ground. We're going to use the pond, which is mostly rainwater anyway. Okay, good. I would have liked to seen a little bit more analysis, and I think this is kind of what Mr. Rainey was getting toward. So how much water is in that 10 acres? And based on the rain, or not 10 acres, in the pond, and how did you come up with 10 acres? Is that the right mass balance with water? You got that?
Yeah, so the tank has 4 billion gallons in it currently. Each year from the water that will be accumulated from rainfall will be a little bit over 1.4 million, depending on that's the water that will land directly into the tank. And if you have more that flow into it, you can't really calculate that without going out and surveying or stuff like that. So it's going to be, we use 1.4 million, and we said irrigating 5 inches, how many acres can we irrigate like that? With just 1.4 million gallons. The reason why we didn't do more than that is because if we did more than that, we would deplete that water that's already in there. And then at some point we'd have more acres than you could irrigate with just 1.4 million, because that's all that they're going to get each year.
Okay, you convinced me you did the calculations on that. And I realized that you didn't really have time in your presentation to throw in all those calculations, but that's a good one. So good job. Your risk analysis. Let me go up to your risk analysis slide. Here it is. Okay, you identified some risks, but there was no mitigation that you mentioned. So I didn't know that the number one problem, I assume this is the number one problem with drip lines because you mentioned it first, is there are animals all over the place chewing up these drip lines. I've never heard a farmer complain about that, but maybe that's going on. So whatever these risks are, you got to mitigate them. How are you gonna reduce their effects or try to prevent them from happening? I didn't hear you mention any of that.
Yeah, I mean, we're potentially counting on the next group to use maybe the double knotted fence that they were mentioning last presentation in order to protect our crops. But we definitely are two most important risks that we're facing would definitely be weather and crop losses.
So that's an economic analysis in itself you could do. What is the threat with regard to wildlife or other animals intruding on this 100 acres? Only 10 of it has drip tape, so maybe you're only fencing 10 acres. And what's the cost of that? Is that going to outweigh the potential damage? I mean, that's a whole calculation you can do to mitigate that risk. Okay, so you lost some points there. Joe already hit my comment about your economic analysis here. I was in my head. I was adding up the expenses there. I mean, you got the number. I can see the revenue. I would have liked to see that at the top, and then your expenses with a total of expenses, and then you could swap the columns, and it easily flows to your net, which is really the main thing you want there. So a little bit of table organization, but you got the main aspects of it. Okay, that's not really a chart. That's a table.
So the Gantt chart, if I did it in Project Libre.
I was going to ask you, what software would you use?
Project Libre.
Is that what Dr. Lacey teaches y'all?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that's what I use. The problem is with Gantt charts, if you want to print it out, it's about 7 pages long.
Right.
So with being a year's time span of everything, I can't really include everything. The way it projects on the computer screen, it flows with each single different line.
Yeah, I've seen that. So I realize that software doesn't really lend itself.
After class, and like, how would you want to enter that in my paper? And
so when the software output doesn't work for a presentation, you got to come up with your own.
Yeah.
And you could easily do that with some PowerPoint bars going across, and you know you've got one that's 150 days, so you're just going to have that broken and have it written on there 150 days. So there might be a way to demonstrate that, but I had trouble following. You got the work. You've got the work done, but the point of this class is how to present that work.
I'll go around in there. So
yeah, so that didn't work out for you. So for the final presentation,
I'll have it in Excel sheet and spread everything out. For
something like that might help. All right, but that was a nice recovery. Also, in your economic analysis, you didn't really mention this, but your payback period is right in here. In year 3, you're beginning to make a profit. So payback period is a check mark that I'm looking for. I'm also looking for a net present value. You could obviously do that since you have a cash flow. So maybe that'll be in your paper. Okay, good job, Dr. Costello.
Are you saying that you get a final report or the current report?
Both. Net present value and your ROI.
I only had one word for you. Excellent. Professor McGee has done the hard work and pointed out all the little issues with the presentation. I decided to sit back and relax and enjoy a good presentation. So I decided to take that route. You really acknowledge you were not going anywhere with your ideas. You found the right people to give you advice, you put it together, you're answering the questions to your clients. So I gave you a perfect score. I never do that, but I think you did a wonderful job today. So excellent. That's the only thing.